Genevieve Carminati was educated at Vermont College of Norwich University and Westchester University of Pennsylvania. She is a professor of English and college-wide women's studies coordinator at Montgomery College. Her research and writing focuses on issues of power related to race, class, gender, and health. Winner of an Outstanding Faculty Award in 2005 and an NISOD Award in 2006, Genevieve is the president of the Mid-Atlantic Women's Studies Association and the Hers Foundation. She is also a poet and fiction writer.
Thank you all. I'm very pleased to be here. Mimi just gave you the title of my piece. She had to take a big, deep breath to give it to you. And what I'd like to point out in the sculpture here, which we'll come back to, are some of the elements that the visual elements that we see, which is what we're going to be focusing on in this discussion. And particularly, I'd like you to pay attention to the handbag of Rosa Parks, which became an interesting symbol in our discussion about this sculpture. But we do see this is the image, obviously, of Rosa Parks being led away by two looming white police officers or some sort of law authority there. But we do note how dignified and defined she is in the sculpture, as well as that she is dressed in red, white, and blue, and has those manacled hands and is clutching that handbag, and we'll come back to looking at what the handbag represented to the students. I get to follow Dia, so she already talked to you a lot about what this course is about. I also used this, the museum experience in my EN 102 Techniques of Reading and Writing 2 class. And some of what we were doing in our class is illustrated here. But we had a class theme. I had the students write on social issues, and I found that if we tied it to the ideas of identity, personal identity, they had a better idea of what they might want to talk about and what social issues are. So for this course, just quickly an overview of the sorts of things that we were talking about in terms of argument and research writing. We have the theme, and that arguments take place in a context of a conversation that isn't just one person presenting a point of view, but there are many, and the museum experience really helped with that, to see that out there in the world these ideas are being presented, and that students need to be aware of how to read arguments and to recognize other points of view, and lastly, the notion that arguments can be visual, which is how we tied into the museum experience in a big way, so that visual arguments can be presented in many ways. And we have here charts, photos, ads, film, posters, clothing as examples, but obviously objects in museums, which is what I began to think about. Oh, before I go there, one more thing here. In the course, we read this book together, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, and Other Conversations About Race by Beverly Daniel Tatum. We had other readings as well, but what I was trying to get them to think about is the connection between identity and social issues. And this was a wonderful book that talked a lot about the development of racial identity and how do we come to understand each other and other people's backgrounds and race. And I have a quote here that shows some of the aspects of the book that tied the notion of racial identity to a social issue, particularly here, education. And so we see, this is toward the end of the book, Tatum saying, many of us have a vision of where we would like to be, a vision of schools where all students have the opportunity and encouragement to achieve at a high standard. It is a vision of multi-ethnic communities characterized by equitable and just group relations rather than the present deeply ingrained power hierarchies that systematically advantage some and systematically disadvantage others. Obviously, she's talking about racism in this book and the ways in which it affects people and has an effect on our communities. An understanding of racial identity development for both white students and students of color is one important tool in building the road toward understanding and community, because it gives us a better understanding of the complex dynamics operating in our daily interactions with one another. Enhanced understanding leads to enhanced cooperation, and this project must be a collaborative effort across racial lines if it is to be successful. And so the students did presentations from this book that we read together, and reading journals. Now, in thinking about the Smithsonian Fellowship, one of the things that really stood out for me as we did our readings and had discussions and met with the curators was the value of the object itself. And what I began to really see is how that tied in so well with the notion of visual argument that really would help students think about argument in a broader way, in a wider way, more applicable in their lives than just what we were doing in the classroom. And so some of the things that we talked about were really very interesting to me, was that exhibits really are put together, the idea that they aren't just like a bunch of objects and here are a bunch of objects that show you something about this time period or this person or, this country or something of that nature, that they really are chosen, that some things are excluded, that there really is a point of view being presented. And this question here of being subversive, some of the curators talk to us about the fact that they have to think about who their sponsors are, who's giving them the money. And sometimes there's a message they want to get across and they have to figure out how to do it. Also, in terms of the object and its message, beginning to think about some of these things that we're talking about, but beginning to really look at it as an argument, that they are representative and symbolic and can show us ideas about values and power. So with these sorts of notions, I began to think about how I could use the museums to support EN 102 and the notions of argument and research. We went to 2 exhibits. Race, Are We So Different, which Daya referenced at the National Museum of Natural History, and the Struggle for Justice exhibit at the National Portrait Gallery. The first exhibit, it was temporary, is no longer up, but the Struggle of Justice is a permanent exhibit. And we took a trip together. We went on a field trip together. So fortunately, I have all these nice photos of my students. The first assignment when we went to Race, Are We So Different was really to make them look at the exhibits as an argument and to think about the various things we talked about in terms of writing arguments. So they were to choose either an object or a particular part of the exhibit and think about what was going on there. How did it represent an argument? And so just starting with the notion of race, are we so different, as perhaps a working research question, and then looking for the various aspects of argument in something that they chose, an image, an object, a part of the exhibit that they enjoyed or that they connected with, and to go through and look, what is a thesis statement being presented? How is there supportive evidence? In what context is it being presented in terms of what are alternate positions, or maybe either being presented or being suggested? And then I wanted them to think about how does it relate to our theme that we're talking about in class, identity and social issues. And here are some things that the students wrote in their papers. This exhibit really showed various aspects of the impact of race, or particularly racism, in our country, such as education, housing, economics, medical, historical, some cultural impacts. And I chose these few quotes because I thought that they showed us understanding on the students' part of the argument that was presented, the context, the impact that it illustrated on themselves or others, and that they considered the theme that we were talking about of identity and social issues. So the first student said, In all, this exhibit expanded my thinking and the privilege I have as a Black student in America compared to whites. Although I know we have come a long way to try to put an end to this inequality, we have a long way to go before we are economically and socially equal. There are policies that need to be shifted from the race debate to that of correcting wealth difference. Even though race can have an impact, socioeconomic variables might have a larger impact in determining life outcomes than skin color or racial identity does. And so really what he was recognizing is sort of a systematic racism that has existed, and saying that that's the problem, not people's race, not the color of people's skin. The second student made this comment, and this refers to what Dia was talking about. What I enjoyed most about this exhibit is that it explains nicely the spreading of people from Africa to all over the world. There are many racist people in the world. If they understood that the reality is that our ancestors were the same, we all came from Africa, and we have been moving and mixing ever since, maybe there would be no racism in the world. And so this student really thinking about alternate views and maybe coming up with a solution proposal there. Then the other exhibit, the Struggle for Justice exhibit, which is at the National Portrait Gallery and is a collection of sculptures and photographs and paintings, portraits of people who were instrumental in creating change in our country. And so what I asked the students to do there was, again, to think in terms of argument, but to choose one of these pieces that they connected with in some way. Find out about the person. How does the person's life connect with the social issue? How does the portrait portray both the person and the social issue? So I asked them to describe it. What's going on? Again, thinking about the representation going on. How is someone presenting a point of view? There's the visual argument. And then to think, how does it relate to the research topic? Because the question earlier was to Dia was asking, how do you get all of this in? Well, if it connects with what we're doing, then I think it's much more valuable, but also we can get it all in. And then I asked them themselves to find an image. They have an idea about a research topic. So what can you find online that's going to present a visual argument for your topic? What I saw here was the students who wrote, these are a couple of pieces, and they show an understanding of the connection between the personal and political, and also an understanding of what we're doing there, how this connects with the research that I'm asking them to do. So the first student said, I see a similarity between the image of civil rights activist James Farmer and my research topic because they both are about social issues. They both contain the problems, the effects, and the consequences that social issues can cause. However, both are trying to send out a message that it is possible to be fixed, that there is a solution. The image of James Farmer paints his struggle in life through his expression, but in that same face, it paints the accomplishment of making a difference. I loved that, it was so beautiful. And then this second student took a different tactic, and she was looking at the Rosa Parks sculpture, and what she had to say was, this exhibit may help me with my research paper because it will demonstrate how we are regressing toward the past and how we are repeating past events. She was looking at some of the laws, the new laws in Arizona having to do with immigrants. Social identity will be an issue in this country for years, but the question is, what are we doing to not repeat history and to take its lesson to be a better society? So some very thoughtful responses. At this exhibit, this was the exhibit where the Rosa Parks sculpture was. And what I really found fascinating is when I spoke with the students about it, they came to really focus on that handbag. And this was amazing to me, what they started to say. Now, I already mentioned some of the things that maybe are more obvious, but they focused on the idea that with her manacled hands, she was clasping this handbag. So of course they said, well, it represents her gender. And maybe it represents, some of them said, maybe it represents that it's poor and she has to hold on to her money. But they also started to say, but maybe it means that she's taking on this burden. She's holding on to it. She's holding on to the responsibility. And in that way, they saw that her cause and herself were almost one through this representation of clutching this handbag, that she was taking it on. And so some amazing comments sometimes come through in these discussions. And now remember, I told you that the students part of the assignment was for the students to find an image online that they could say was a visual argument that represented what they were doing the research on. So maybe you want to try to guess what some of these are, so I put some of these together here. This first student was writing about Muslim Americans and was saying that, and he was looking at the fact that he thought Muslim Americans were sort of excluded and not really fully accepted as Americans. So this was the image that he found to represent his argument. This second one, I don't know if you can see, that's a thumbprint with a face embedded in it. And that student was writing about the fact that she felt that identity, that we're really born with identity because of the way people view us. And so she chose this to represent that identity comes with our anatomy. This one here at the end was sort of interesting. This student chose this. This is the same student who was talking about the Arizona laws about immigrants, and there was a new law that said that police officers could stop people if they thought that they might be illegal immigrants, and so it was making decisions based on their physical appearances. And so she chose this, and one of the things that she said is, this man who is asking to look at people's papers, there may be some people who would try to determine his ethnicity, and she saw that in this, so she was talking about how it just didn't make any sense and how unfair the law was. This one in the corner has to do with human trafficking, and the student shows it because of all of the chains wrapped around the wrist, saying that it showed how impossible it was, just basically impossible to get out of once someone was in that position. This last one had to do with genetic engineering and the notion of making commodities of human beings, so with the barcode and the fetus. I think they were pretty successful in a lot of these ways. The value of the museum experience is just overwhelming, and I just tried to note here some of the ways in which I thought it enriched our classroom experience. I thought the students really learned more, were better able to understand some of the concepts. As I said here, lifted the study off of the page. The visual, kinetic, and communal learning experience was great for the students. And I really found that they came to understand much better what I was trying to do in terms of our theme. This last one, this was a quote from the students, but I found that the students really enjoyed being in the museums, and some who maybe were not quite sure that they were going to like it came away. I think doing it as a class really is quite valuable. And this student said that what he got out of it was that he was able to connect and capture new meaning in what we were teaching in the class. And then here, this is just a montage of some students interacting and capturing new meaning in the museum. Thank you very much. No questions. Oh.
Can I speak from here? Is that all right? Without the microphone. I like a lot. They use secondary sources as well, like engage in. Are there sources about the exhibits that you get from curators or through research, besides the online sites, they can research essays, they can actually get engaged in looking at secondary responses to the issues and also some of the objects and such. And I really like the assignment itself. I was curious about how they fleshed that out in terms of the research paper itself for the particular.
Yeah, the research paper wasn't, this was a project. The research paper wasn't about the museum experience, but we did go, that was part of, and I'm glad you brought that up, it was part of what we did in preparation. I didn't tell them where anything was. We went, we did the research together. I happened to be in one of those networked classrooms, so that the students sat at the computers and they found out where the museums were, how we would get there, what metro to take, what it was going to cost. And they looked at and they visited the sites for the exhibits ahead of time, so they had a sense of where we were going, and maybe even sort of chose what they would like to to take a look at before we left.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
We have one more question.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you, Angela.
I think you can hear me. I think I'm sort of expanding on the previous question.
They actually.
Oh, okay. And wondered, so did these students go on their own and continuously sort of a little not believing in that a lot of the students from Montgomery College have not been down to the Smithsonian, and it's thanks to all of you that you're encouraging not only the experience, the value of a museum experience, but learning through objects. And so I wondered, was this first time? Do you think they would continue to go? And what sort of impact the visit is making and learning through objects, through a museum experience, and extended long term?
I think it had a big impact. I think a lot of the students are, first of all, sort of are, I don't want to necessarily say afraid, but they're so unfamiliar with DC that they are a bit afraid. They're afraid they're going to get lost. They're not going to know the right place to go. But I think that they really came to see, I just put a few comments here, but I asked them, one of the questions in the project was, what did you learn? What did you enjoy about this experience? And time after time, they did say that, yeah, this was something they would want to do again. But I think going together, we didn't travel, we didn't meet and travel on the train together, but we met at the museum together and walked around together and so forth. I think that made a big difference. I think they felt very comfortable being in the group, and maybe it initiated something. I hope that would continue. But I think it really, yes, I really do think that a lot of them changed their minds about what was in the museum and whether or not the museum was for them. Were they, is this the place that I am supposed to be? Would I be accepted here? So I think, I think it really made a big difference.
One of the things that we are constantly grappling with is this notion of not only just students, but adults feeling intimidated entering into a museum for the first time. And when it becomes every Sunday family outing, they become more and more comfortable and come away from a great experience.
And that's true, and I think that's really important to note as well. That we went on a Sunday, and the students were invited to bring friends, to bring family members. Right up here, whoops, no, it's not there. Okay, I thought I put it in. There was a husband and wife photo. I guess I took it out. But yeah, they brought siblings and came. So I think that also made a big difference because it, and maybe will continue to do because they and their friend enjoyed it together, or they and their children.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one last comment.
Okay.
With the summer class, because we went earlier this summer, and summer being a time when a lot of people come to visit, I believe there were 4 students who actually took visitors, out-of-town visitors, back down to the Smithsonian to show them the exhibit. And because at that point they knew so much about the exhibit, they were able to talk to me about that. And I believe I had one student in the fall, someone came to visit, and she took family members, I think it was around Thanksgiving. She took family members down to the exhibit after having dinner.
It's just cultivating that comfort zone, as we call it. And then
Yeah. So part of what we do, another part of education.